in their particular area, and he provides what I've written here, professional linguistic competencies. And then finally, the one area that I think is the most unique and one that I find particularly enjoyable as an ESP practitioner myself is that the ESP person is, in their classes, not the primary knower of the course content. Now, what do I mean by primary knower? Well, for example, I have a class of physical education students, and their content area is physical education. My job is to teach them English so they can develop it. Again, this goes back to training. I teach them English so they can use it in their physical education environments. So, me personally, I am not the main knower of the course content. I don't know as much about physical education as the students do. Let me give you another example. I tutored for a long time a lawyer, and let's face it, folks, I do not know law, and if I did, I probably wouldn't be teaching English anyway. So the lawyer obviously knew more about law than I did, so my job was to teach him English and how to use that English in the legal law context that he faces. So that for me is the biggest difference, that when you walk into that classroom, I remember when I first came to Chile, one of my colleagues pointed out to me, because I'm a native speaker, I'm from the United States, that students tend to look at me as, they view me as God. I don't see myself as God, by the way, but students tend to look at me as God because I'm a native speaker. Well, when an ESP practitioner, trainer, teacher walks into the classroom, they're not seen in the same way as their students. Their students know more about the content area than they do. And I think that it brings up a big challenge for the ESP practitioner. They have to do a little bit of research in that particular content area, and they get to, for me, one of the exciting things is that I get to learn a little bit about that particular content area, so I gain some knowledge. I'm learning as well as the students are learning. So I think that in those ways, that an ESP practitioner has a little more complex and a very different job than the GE practitioner. Let's move now to our first activity, Studying My Case 1. Studying My Case is a nice little activity that I've used in class in my ESP classes before. And I found this in ESP Ideas, which is one of a set of, I think it's the Pilgrim's resource books for English teachers from Longman. And I find these resource books to be excellent sources of activities for me as a teacher, not just for ESP, but for my other classes as well. I adapted this from ESP Ideas by Randall Holmes. And it's a good activity to help you get started with finding out the English language needs for students. And we're gonna take a look at this and find out your English language needs. So how do we do this? First off, I want you to imagine that you're the hero of your own novel. Think of yourself, think of your day-to-day actions in English. Now, I know we're in an EFL setting and there's probably not a lot of things that you do outside in English. You know, out there in the real world, they're speaking Spanish most of the time. But think hard about using English in your day-to-day actions. Think about your experiences now and in the past, and try to visualize yourself as a character in a novel, and your interactions with situations that you can identify in English. Now I want you to make note of some of those most memorable experiences, and then I need you to get in pairs and recount your actions Using the third person. Yesterday, he was standing in line and he needed to ask someone how much longer this would be, okay? So identify and make note of the situations in English where you wanted to say something, but you had some kind of problem. And if you really need to, although it's probably not recommended, but if you need to, you can use Spanish to note these problems down when you interact with your partners. I'd like to present to you a teaching strategy that has helped me with my ESP students, and I hope it will help you. And it not only applies to ESP students, but teaching English in general areas as well. And I've titled this Language Learning in Content Area Instruction, and we'll find that a lot of times there will be content area and specific area. The content area is the specified area that you're dealing with, and I'm sure you can all recognize that. Okay, we're going to start off. I'm going to give you a brief overview of a theory about learning language. And to begin with, the general object, as we all know, the general object of language is communication. I say we all know. Sometimes we kind of lose the forest for the trees and we tend to focus on specifics and not look at the big picture. Or really, when we're talking about language, we're talking about being able to communicate with others. And in ESP, it's all about communicating in that, if we go back to the first part that I talked about earlier, it's communicating in that limited area. Remember, that's one of the big differences between general English and specific English for specific purposes, is that it has a very limited scope of language functions. Okay? So the object of language is communication. J. Cummins identified two fundamental skill areas in language learning. The first one he termed basic interpersonal communicative skills, BICS, and I think that that's an abbreviation. I have never heard it BICS. Maybe it is an acronym, BICS. I kind of like acronyms, so I'm going to say BICS. BICS, and what BICS refers to is social language, everyday activities that we use. This would be a lot of, and I'm oversimplifying a little bit here, this would be one area of focus, a large area of focus for general English teaching would be basic interpersonal communicative skills, BICS. The second basic area of language learning that Cummins identified was cognitive academic language proficiency, CALP. And CALP is much more complex than BICS. And CALP involves classroom, professional, vocational language, so it applies directly to the ESP environment. It deals with more abstract and complex issues, and it requires learners to use language for comparing, contrasting, explaining, analyzing, defining, etc., etc. And it's a cornerstone of something that we'll talk about in the next and last section, which is facilitative language teaching. And this CALP is exactly what we do in ESP classes. So we're going to take a little closer look at CALP here. Cummins also created a little chart that he used to help explain what goes on in language teaching and learning involving BICS and CALP. And he relates, what happens here is he's relating the learning area to the area of context that's being used. So we start in quadrant number 1. He identifies cognitively undemanding learning objectives, and that would be BICS. It's basic, it's cognitively undemanding, and it's context embedded. Quadrant 2 is BICS also. It's cognitively undemanding, but it's context reduced. Now, it's important we know what BICS